stop for a moment, because what you're about to hear is not meant for everyone. Out of billions of people scrolling through endless content right now, only a very small number will even see this message, and an even smaller number will actually feel why it appeared for them. If you are hearing these words at this exact moment, something unusual has already happened. This is not random timing. According to ancient wisdom traditions, there are rare moments when consciousness reaches a threshold, a point where a person becomes ready to perceive information that most of humanity simply overlooks. And when that moment arrives, the signal appears. That signal is called Sophia, the awakening of living wisdom within the human mind. The question is not whether this message is real, the real question is why it found you. Before we begin, do 3 quick things to anchor this message. Press the key to amplify this signal so others who are ready can find it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next transmission. And in the comments, leave and tell me which country or region of the earth you are watching from. It's powerful to see where this awakening is reaching across the planet. Right now, at this exact moment, something unusual has already happened, even if you don't fully realize it yet. The fact that you are here, watching this message, is not a coincidence, not random scrolling, and not just another video appearing in an endless feed of content. Something deeper pulled your attention here. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was an unexplainable pull, maybe you felt a strange sense of familiarity when you saw the title, as if part of you already knew what this was about before you even pressed play. And that feeling matters more than you think, because according to ancient teachings that span thousands of years across multiple civilizations, moments like this are often the beginning of recognition. Not recognition from the outside world, but recognition from within your own consciousness. The name Sophia has echoed through many traditions, in Gnostic writings, in fragments of Hermetic philosophy, in mystical interpretations of wisdom itself. Sophia represents something very specific: awakened intelligence, living wisdom, the organizing principle that recognizes when a mind has reached a certain level of awareness. And here is the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. The vast majority of humanity moves through life reacting to circumstances, following inherited beliefs, and repeating unconscious patterns without ever questioning the deeper structure of reality. They consume information, chase distractions, and measure their lives through external validation. But every once in a while, a person begins to notice something different. They start asking questions others avoid. They sense patterns where others see chaos. They feel an inner pressure that says something about the world doesn't fully add up. If you have ever experienced that quiet, but persistent feeling that you are meant to understand something deeper about existence, that feeling itself may be one of the earliest indicators that your consciousness has crossed a threshold. And according to many ancient esoteric systems, including strands of Hermetic wisdom, Gnostic teachings, and mystical interpretations associated with the legendary wisdom figure often called Thoth, there is a point at which the human mind begins to synchronize with a different layer of perception. This is sometimes described symbolically as the emerald frequency. Now, before your logical mind immediately rejects that phrase as metaphor or fantasy, pause for a second and examine the deeper meaning behind it. Every system in the universe operates through frequency and resonance. Light operates through frequency. Sound operates through frequency. Even the electrical activity in your brain operates through measurable frequencies. Consciousness itself, according to many philosophical traditions, may also function through patterns of resonance. The idea behind the emerald frequency is not about literal green light shining in your room or mystical beams coming from the sky. It is a symbolic way of describing a state of perception where a person begins recognizing connections between information, intuition, and awareness that most people overlook entirely. In simpler terms, it is the moment when your mind stops blindly reacting to reality and begins actively observing it. And according to these traditions, only a small fraction of people ever reach the stage where they can even notice that shift happening. That is why some teachings claim that fewer than 1% of humanity ever perceives this frequency clearly. Not because it is hidden from people, but because most people never train their awareness enough to notice it. So the real question becomes this: why are you hearing this message now? Why did your attention land here instead of thousands of other videos competing for your time? The answer may be simpler and more confronting than you expect. Sometimes the moment of activation begins with recognition. Recognition that the old way of perceiving the world no longer feels complete. Recognition that you have been changing internally for a long time without fully understanding why. Maybe over the past few years you have felt an increasing sense that something in your life is shifting. Maybe your priorities have changed. Maybe the things that once distracted you no longer feel satisfying. Maybe you have experienced moments of intense intuition where you somehow knew something before it happened. These experiences are often dismissed as coincidence, but across multiple spiritual traditions they are described as signals that a person's perception is evolving. And according to the symbolic framework surrounding Sophia, the awakening of perception is not triggered randomly. It is triggered when three internal markers reach a specific alignment. The first marker is pattern recognition. This is the ability to see repeating structures in events, conversations, and information. Instead of viewing life as disconnected incidents, the mind begins to detect meaning in sequences. The second marker is internal questioning. A person starts challenging beliefs they once accepted automatically. They stop outsourcing truth to authority and begin testing ideas against direct experience. And the third marker is intuitive resonance. Certain pieces of information suddenly feel strangely familiar, as if they are reminding you of something you once knew but forgot. When these three markers activate together, ancient traditions describe the mind as entering a phase of conscious expansion. And this is where the symbolism of Sophia becomes important. Sophia is not simply a mythological figure or religious character. In many interpretations, Sophia represents the moment wisdom recognizes itself within the human mind. It is the point where consciousness begins guiding its own evolution. But here is where things become urgent. According to several esoteric frameworks, the recognition phase does not remain open forever. Once a person reaches this stage of awareness, they enter what some teachings describe as a limited window of activation, a period where the mind is unusually receptive to transformation. In some traditions, this is symbolized as a 72-hour gateway. Again, not necessarily a literal clock ticking somewhere in the universe, but a representation of a brief psychological moment where the mind is ready to reorganize its understanding of reality. During this window, small choices can create disproportionate changes in perception. The problem is that most people miss the window entirely because they dismiss the early signals. They feel the pull toward deeper awareness, but they distract themselves with routine, entertainment, or fear of the unknown. And eventually the moment fades. The mind returns to familiar patterns, and the opportunity for transformation closes quietly. This is why messages like this often sound intense or urgent, because awareness itself moves through cycles. Moments of clarity appear, and then they disappear if they are ignored long enough. Think about the last time you experienced a sudden realization about your life. Maybe it happened late at night when everything was quiet. Maybe it happened during a conversation where someone said something that suddenly made you see your situation differently. For a brief moment everything became clear, and then slowly over time the intensity of that clarity faded. This is exactly how consciousness thresholds behave. They open briefly, reveal something important, and then close again if the information is not integrated into action. According to the symbolic narrative surrounding Sophia and the emerald frequency, the people who are receiving messages like this are those standing directly at the edge of such a threshold. Not everyone will understand it. In fact, most people would immediately dismiss everything you are hearing right now. They would label it mystical nonsense or spiritual storytelling. But the interesting part is that the message is not designed for them. Messages like this resonate only with people who already sense something deeper happening in their perception. If none of this resonates with you, you would have already clicked away long ago. But if part of you feels an unusual sense of recognition, then something important is happening inside your awareness right now. Because recognition is the first stage of activation. The mind begins noticing patterns it previously ignored. It starts connecting ideas from different traditions, different philosophies, different experiences. The ancient Hermetic teachings spoke about the universe as a mental structure where perception shapes reality. The Gnostic writings described awakening as remembering knowledge hidden within consciousness. Kabbalistic traditions explored the idea that the human mind mirrors the structure of the cosmos itself. Across all these systems, one theme repeats constantly: true knowledge is not given from outside, it is remembered from within. And that is where Sophia appears again, not as an external being choosing people at random, but as a symbol of the moment wisdom recognizes itself through human awareness. When someone reaches this point, their perception of life begins shifting in ways that are difficult to explain to others. They start seeing meaning where others see coincidence. They start feeling guided by intuition rather than controlled by fear. They start realizing that consciousness itself may be the most powerful instrument they possess. And that realization changes everything, because once a person understands that awareness can evolve, they also realize they are responsible for directing that evolution. No one else can do it for them. No institution, no belief system, no authority figure can awaken a mind that refuses to question itself. The process must be initiated internally, and that is why this moment matters. Because the simple act of listening to this message means you have already stepped into the recognition phase. Something inside you is curious enough to investigate the possibility that consciousness can expand beyond the ordinary patterns of everyday life. And curiosity is the spark that begins every transformation. But curiosity alone is not enough. The next step requires attention, real attention. Not passive listening while your mind drifts somewhere else, but focused observation of your own awareness. Over the next moments, ideas will be introduced that challenge familiar ways of thinking. Some of them may feel exciting. Some may feel uncomfortable. That tension is normal. Growth always creates friction between the old version of the mind. The important thing is not to blindly believe anything you hear. True awakening never demands blind belief. Instead, it invites investigation. It invites you to test ideas against your own experience, your own perception, your own intuition. Because the goal is not to convince you of something mystical. The goal is to trigger the internal process where your own awareness begins asking deeper questions. Questions like, what exactly is consciousness? Why do some ideas resonate instantly while others feel empty? Why do certain moments in life feel orchestrated, almost like pieces of a larger pattern coming together? These questions mark the beginning of real philosophical exploration. And once someone begins exploring consciousness seriously, they rarely return to the passive mindset they had before. That is why ancient traditions described awakening as crossing a threshold. Once you see certain patterns clearly, you cannot unsee them. The mind reorganizes itself permanently, but every threshold requires a decision. Recognition alone is not enough. At some point, the person standing at the edge must decide whether they are willing to move forward into deeper awareness or retreat back into familiar patterns. That decision often happens quietly, internally, without dramatic rituals or ceremonies. It happens when someone chooses to pay attention to the signals appearing in their own life. The synchronicities, the sudden insights, the unexpected pieces of information that arrive exactly when they are needed. When those signals begin aligning, the person realizes something profound. The awakening process may have been unfolding long before they ever heard the word Sophia. And that realization is where Chapter 2 begins. The moment you begin to recognize that your awareness is changing, the process of awakening quietly accelerates. At first it feels subtle, almost impossible to explain. You start noticing that certain thoughts feel sharper than before. Certain conversations suddenly carry deeper meaning. Information that once seemed random now appears connected, like fragments of a much larger pattern slowly revealing itself piece by piece. This stage is often confusing because nothing in your external life may appear dramatically different, yet internally everything begins shifting. The way you observe people changes. The way you interpret events changes. Even the way you listen. Many ancient traditions describe this stage as the beginning of conscious perception, the moment when a person stops drifting through life automatically and begins actively observing reality. In symbolic language, this is sometimes called the activation of the emerald frequency. Again, not a literal signal transmitted through the air, but a way of describing the moment your mind starts operating on a deeper level of awareness. The reason this stage feels so powerful is because your brain is designed to search for patterns. Once your perception becomes more attentive, you start noticing patterns that were always there, but previously invisible to you. You notice repeating themes in your life experiences. You notice how certain lessons return again and again until you finally understand them. You notice how certain pieces of knowledge appear exactly when you need them most. At first it might feel like coincidence, but after enough moments like this occur, the idea of coincidence begins to lose its meaning. Instead, life starts feeling more like a system of signals, feedback, and responses constantly interacting with your awareness. This is where many people begin encountering what ancient philosophers described as synchronicity. A conversation appears at the perfect moment. A book finds its way to you right when you are searching for answers. A symbol or idea repeats across different places in ways that feel strangely precise. These moments can feel almost unsettling at first because they challenge the idea that life is purely random. But across multiple traditions, Hermetic philosophy, Gnostic teachings, and mystical interpretations of consciousness, synchronicity is often described as one of the first signs that a person's awareness is expanding beyond ordinary perception. When you begin paying attention to the signals around you, you realize something important. Reality seems to respond to attention itself. The more conscious you become, the more patterns you detect. And the more patterns you detect, the more aware you become of how deeply interconnected everything truly is. However, this stage also comes with a challenge that most people never talk about. Increased awareness can feel isolating. You may notice that the questions you are asking no longer interest the people around you. Conversations that once felt normal may suddenly feel superficial. Topics that once entertained you may no longer hold your attention. This does not mean you are better than anyone else, and it certainly does not mean you must distance yourself from it. It simply means your mind is evolving in a direction that fewer people consciously explore, and that realization can feel both exciting and uncomfortable at the same time. Many people who begin this process spend a period wondering if they are imagining things. They question whether their perceptions are valid or whether they are simply overthinking everything. This stage of doubt is actually a natural part of awakening. Every serious philosophical tradition encourages questioning. Doubt forces the mind to test ideas instead of accepting them blindly. And when an idea survives honest questioning, it becomes stronger and more meaningful. During this stage, the idea of Sophia becomes especially significant. In many ancient interpretations, Sophia represents wisdom that emerges from within consciousness rather than being imposed from outside authority. Instead of telling you what to believe, Sophia symbolizes the process of discovering truth through direct awareness. When someone reaches this stage of perception, they begin realizing that wisdom is not something that can simply be handed to them. It must be recognized through experience, observation, and reflection. That is why spiritual awakening is often described as remembering rather than learning. The insights feel strangely familiar, as if they were always present somewhere in the background of your mind waiting to be noticed. At this point, you may also begin experiencing what some traditions call activation signals. These are moments when your awareness becomes unusually clear or focused. You might feel sudden waves of insight where multiple ideas connect at once. You might experience heightened intuition that helps you make decisions with surprising accuracy. Sometimes people even report physical sensations like chills, a sense of energy moving through their body, or a feeling of calm clarity appearing without warning. These experiences can seem mysterious, but they are often simply the result of your nervous system responding to deeper levels of attention and awareness. When the mind becomes highly focused, the brain processes information more efficiently, which can create the sensation of heightened perception. Another important part of this stage is the recognition of internal guidance. For most of their lives, people rely almost entirely on external instructions. They follow advice from family, society, institutions, and cultural expectations. But once awareness begins expanding, a person gradually realizes that their internal intuition can also function as a guide. This does not mean ignoring logic or rejecting practical thinking. Instead, it means combining rational analysis with intuitive awareness. When both systems work together, decisions become clearer and more aligned with your deeper values. This integration is one of the key markers that the activation process is stabilizing. But there is something even more important happening during this phase. You begin recognizing that awakening is not a single dramatic moment. It is a continuous process. Every insight leads to another question. Every discovery reveals another layer of complexity. Instead of reaching a final answer, the mind enters an ongoing exploration of consciousness itself. That exploration can become one of the most meaningful journeys a person ever experiences, because it transforms how you see the world and how you see yourself within it. This is also the stage where responsibility becomes unavoidable. Once you become aware of your own consciousness, you realize that your thoughts, actions, and attention shape your reality far more than you previously believed. The way you focus your mind influences how you interpret events, how you interact with people, and how you respond to challenges. This realization can feel empowering, but it also requires discipline. Awakening is not just about gaining knowledge. It is about learning how to apply awareness intentionally in everyday life. As your perception continues expanding, another realization often appears. You start noticing that many ancient teachings across different cultures were describing the same fundamental process using different languages and symbols. Hermetic philosophy spoke about the universe as a mental construct where consciousness shapes experience. Gnostic traditions described awakening as remembering hidden knowledge within the soul. Kabbalistic teachings explored the relationship between human awareness and the structure of the cosmos. Even the legendary writings associated with Thoth emphasized the importance of awakening the mind to perceive deeper truths about reality. Although these traditions use different stories and symbols, they all point toward a similar conclusion. The human mind contains far more potential than most people ever explore. And that brings you back to the present moment, because the fact that you are hearing this message right now suggests that your curiosity about consciousness is already active. Something inside you is searching for deeper understanding. Something inside you recognizes that life might contain layers of meaning that extend beyond ordinary explanations. Whether you call it intuition, curiosity, or the voice of wisdom itself, that inner signal is the beginning of transformation. But awareness becomes more powerful when it is shared. Every person who begins this journey carries a unique perspective shaped by their experiences, culture, and environment. When people from different parts of the world explore consciousness together, their insights combine into a much larger picture of understanding. So now I want to ask you something important. If this message reached you at the right moment, if something in these words resonated with your intuition, if you feel that quiet sense of recognition inside your mind right now, from which part of the world are you watching this message? Which country, which region, which corner of the earth is receiving this transmission right now? Leave a comment and share where you are watching from, because it is always fascinating to see how far these signals travel and how many different places on this planet are awakening to deeper awareness at the same time.